Picture this. During lecture, you ask a simple question, and the room just goes quiet. You know that is an important topic, so students care, but it feels like they don't really feel safe to really speak out. So, as an instructor, what do you do? So, welcome to Off Syllabus with Manny, where we talk about the hard parts of teaching, the ones that do not make it to the syllabus. Today, we are exploring community and how community is important to engage in tough conversations. Joining me today is Rachel Piontak from the Institute of Citizens and Scholars. She will share with us some strategies on how to build community and how to leverage community to engage students in tough conversations. So let's dive in. Rachel, I personally believe that community is the magic ingredient to having or engaging in tough conversations in the classroom. So, to you, what community means in terms of helping students engage in civil discourse?
Well, yes. Yes to the magic ingredient piece. I think that cultivating that magic ingredient, which you said so well, requires in part that recognizing that it doesn't come from a single source. Community is not a monolith. Community, especially in the context of a classroom, in really any group work that you may do in your professional life as well, requires some combination of respect and trust and, to your point about feeling safe, recognizing, assuming that there is psychological safety, making sure that psychological safety is a basis. I don't want to make these assumptions more widely than I should. But that combination is really what sets the foundation for folks to stay in difficult conversations long enough to move through them and learn with them and through them. Um, yeah, I mean, ultimately, for civil discourse, to your point, speaking with your community, with that foundation of respect and trust, then allows disagreement to become something that that group can work with and work through and not just work around.
Yeah, so like, I now have a sort of a follow-up question because I'm curious to see what you think. Like, do you think like the community is like the foundation, is like the core to engage in civil discourse?
This feels, you're a scientist, and I feel like by saying it's not the core, but it's a core is somehow unscientific, but I'm going to say it.
It's only one core. It's only one. There cannot be two cores.
There can be no more cores. Listen, I think there's multiple pathways here. I do think that community is maybe the roof, the ceiling, not the floor. Is that how that saying goes? Like that's the
Yeah, yeah.
ideal for sure, but I do think I tend to sometimes oversimplify community to say, in my mind, it's folks who are ideologically similar or have enough in common that that you risk groupthink. You risk not engaging in that um, productive conflict that is crucial for problem solving. And so, while I would say yes, comma, um, I would argue that community is not really a requirement to have tough conversations well, and I think that we run the risk of having unrealistic expectations or putting unrealistic expectations on folks if we say that it is, particularly if you're teaching a huge lecture hall class, 100, 200 students. I'm not about to walk in there and say, "Hey, faculty member, could you just build some community real quick so folks can have tough conversations?" Because that's unrealistic. And so thinking about it in different ways, I think is valuable too.
I actually I'm thinking about how we actually conflate these terms. So you're talking about community, but you're also talking about like groupthink. Think like combining people that they are thinking the same way, and you're talking about how these two things are not the same. So at some point, I want to talk about inclusive like group work. But before I dive into that, I really want to talk for a few minutes, maybe or less than that. These episodes are not that long.
Yeah.
About the deep, like what constitute community, because it doesn't have to be a lot of people working together that agree on. Like, we can disagree and still building community. And I'm thinking about like working with family members. Like, that is a very strong community that stays with you forever. And I don't think everybody thinks of family as this like always agreeing, always on the same page community, right?
Yeah.
Do you have any thoughts to share about that?
Yeah, well, I mean, your image of a family is perfect, and not only because I'm currently at my dad's house in a state which is not where I live, so I'm around my family right now, so it feels very fresh. But I do think if you boil it down, community in that setting, and even I would argue a functional community in the local way, like my neighborhood, my municipality, that sort of community comes down to, do we have each other's best interests at heart? It does not mean that we're going to agree or get along about even half of it along the way, but at the end of the day, am I going to drive you to the hospital if you need it? Or as I always tell my partner, we know that we have good neighbors if we can contact them if their house is getting broken into, because
Yeah.
it means that we know enough about them to know, like, that's not their car. That's not them usually walking out with a gigantic TV. Like, what's going on? So I do think at its bare minimum, it really is just looking out for each other.
Yeah, and this reminds me a lot to one of our previous conversations about group agreements, because I think it has to do with this working together regardless of whether we agree or disagree. We build a community because we support each other. Maybe that's the way to like think about it, because I really like your examples of what you're talking about.
Yeah, I think it's somewhere between telling them if they're getting robbed to supporting each other. Hopefully more on the support side. But I think that's absolutely true. And to also harken back to a former conversation that we had about group agreements being made explicit, to say, in this community that we are trying to build, we all agree blank. We agree that we will respect each other even when we disagree, or regardless of our views, whatever the case may be. And that, to bring it back to higher ed, that is a space of rehearsal. That is a space where we can really build that muscle and engage in critical thinking and make mistakes. So I think all of this combined means that community can begin in the classroom. And one of the ways it can begin is through establishing those group norms. Yeah.
Yeah, so like now I also want to do somewhat the same thing you're doing, which is connecting this back to higher education. I feel that we have done a great job at making community confusing uh, to everybody
Like
listening.
our first 5 minutes of this, where we're trying to define it.
But I think what is important is not necessarily to know the definition per se, because I think it will change depending on the environment, and we talk about how environments influence the way people engage with each other. But for you and in your experience, like, how do you define, potentially, maybe not define, but like, how do you describe, I think that's a better way, um good classroom collaborative work or sort of community? How does community looks like in a classroom?
Does it look like a classroom? I mean, I'm trying not to muddy the waters here, but I think it looks like so many things in the way that community can present itself in so many ways. Um, Very practically, I'm going to say that one way community can present itself is through group work that is intentionally inclusive, by which I mean group work that is designed not just, I'm smiling because I've done this in my early days. Group work that is not just, y'all need to figure this out yourselves. Here's the prompt. There's your assignment. Good luck. Because part of group work and how that relates to community is, I'm scrolling on my computer because I want to get this quote right. But when talking about a group project, Parker Palmer says that knowing and learning are communal acts, and they require the communal cycle of discussion, disagreement, and consensus over what has been and what it all means. And I feel like, to me, if we take that to heart and we really design group work for and with students that focus on that cycle of discussion, disagreement, and consensus, that's where the learning is. I don't care what your prompt is or what the project is, but that's where it happens. But I think we can't just throw that at students. And I should say, I'm speaking for myself, mostly teaching undergraduate first years primarily. So, high schoolers plus. And so thinking about where they are developmentally and where they are in their college career, it does require there's a bigger onus on the professor to really intentionally scaffold that experience to say, here's what I want. What do we need to make that happen? Include the students in that. And here are a variety of ways to get there. So not just saying everyone's got to present their PowerPoint, but people have different learning needs. How can we accommodate these things? So is it more work for the professor to help build that community, particularly around inclusive group work? Absolutely. Which wasn't your question, but I just feel the need to let people know.
That is never an easy path. Like normally trying to help students develop these skills takes extra effort. Yeah. Sorry, everybody.
Yeah, if you were coming here for the quick and dirty answers, that's not what you're going to find. But I know that we will provide some resources afterwards that do have good templates, really good ideas to help bring this down into the classroom level.
Right. I do I'm gonna push back on you now because we need to disagree. Because we need to model this.
That's
I
true.
do think we should provide some examples. So,
Okay.
Rachel, do you have any examples? And I'm gonna put two components to this example. So I'm sorry because I'm making it even more confusing.
I'll take notes.
So one, an example that you'd like to create community within a classroom. And second, if you can also embed into this example, how do you help the students learn how to listen to each other through that example that you're sharing? Hopefully that makes sense.
Yes.
Perfect.
Yes. Thanks for those two in particular. Oh, yes. Did you want to add?
I was just going to say, I need to learn how to ask questions, but you cannot answer with yes. So I'm going to work on that.
I'm going to expand on it, though. I think I appreciate that you teased out listening because active listening is, I think, an under-discussed and perhaps underutilized key to all of this. But building community and building that active listening skill can go hand in hand with a bunch of exercises. So just one that I'll highlight. Talkers and listeners, very basic. It is exactly as it sounds. Students pair off. You give them a prompt. This is where the community part comes in. Don't give them a prompt like talk about, your outfit choice of today for 60 seconds. Actually, maybe that's not a bad one. But try to think about something that really helps the students get to know each other. It doesn't have to be, what's your deepest fear, but, tell me about your favorite family vacation or tell me about your favorite holiday tradition, something like that. And then you have one student speak for 60 seconds. The other student can only listen, can say no words. And it is phenomenal every time I've done this, how much struggle it is, how hard it is to not even ask a follow-up, which generally is welcomed. But for practicing active listening, you just listen for 60 seconds. And then when the timing's up, the listener summarizes what they heard. The speaker confirms or denies, depending on how accurate they were, and then they switch. And so doing just that's a less than 5-minute exercise from top to bottom, including a brief debrief, is already getting folks to, again, to harken back to earlier conversations, help them recognize each other's humanity, and then also help build that active listening skill. And there's so many more in this resource that we're going to attach.
Yeah, no, I really like the example. I done it and I agree it's a little difficult. Sometimes it's like listen for 2 minutes. I'm like, oh my God, this feels forever.
Oh, yeah.
Which shows how bad I am at listening. But I will say I learned how bad I was at listening doing qualitative research. Sitting down with people and doing interviews and then trying to transcribe that and listening to myself talking for so long or like not letting people finish. I'm like, oh my God, Manny, you have to stop. It's so hard to transcribe. So he helped me.
Yeah. Who knew it was a self-reflective exercise, but truly.
Yes.
No, so
Yeah.
things
Okay, so we talked about an activity, which what was the name again?
talkers and listeners.
Yeah, because it sounds to me like a board game.
Yeah, it totally does.
Something else is let's go talk about things to avoid. Do you have any advice about things that you should avoid? And you have mentioned some of the things already in this conversation, but anything to avoid when you are trying to build groups in your class or group activities, focus on building community.
Yeah. I mean, things to avoid in any of these contexts that we're discussing, inclusive group work, civil discourse, community building, generally, I mean, don't tokenize. If there's a student who has a particular lived experience that comes up in conversation, and that also includes political ideologies, don't turn to that student and say, "Hey, so what do you think?" Because even if you're not intending to, if you are calling someone out and you know that they are the only or one of the very few in the room that can speak to that perspective, you're building a divide, not a bridge. So being very cognizant of opening the space for a lot of different reflections, or if you genuinely want that student's particular angle of something, do a type of exercise that allows everyone to respond and in an anonymous way. So whether that's anonymous polling or have them I used to carry note cards around. They were on sale one time and I bought way too many. And so I would give my students note cards pretty regularly. And whatever the topic was, I would say, okay, I want you to answer these 3 quick reflection questions about it. And then I gather them up. And at the next class, we would debrief them all together based on those themes. And so that's a good way to aggregate class thoughts and also be able to tease apart some of the unique perspectives without saying, hey, you, tell us what you think about this. And also, at least when it comes to assigning groups, far be it for me to tell faculty how to create their groups, because I know everyone has a different philosophy. It's a real hot topic. But if it's something that you want to encourage productive disagreement, part of that is intentionally not, at least not fostering ideological similarities on the front end. You might get that, you don't know. But at least trying to mix students up so that they're with folks that they might not naturally agree with in XYZ ways really just allows them. But again, don't do that without guidance or scaffolding. Like, give them some support in this. I think those would be my main 2. Like, don't tokenize and mix it up.
Yeah, so I think it makes sense. Like I like it. So Rachel, thank you for sharing your feedback. I'm gonna try to summarize some of the main takeaways.
Please.
And I feel like what I heard was when you're trying to build community within your classes, you want to provide structure, but not too much structure. Like you want them to feel part of the process, because that part of that negotiation of roles and maybe negotiation of what about output they want to produce. That's very important part of the community. And the second part is be careful of your own biases. Don't don't try to, oh, let's put these people because I think they share the same identities in the same group because that will make it effective, because we don't really know and we have to let that be somewhat organic. I mean, we can provide some guidance, but it should be like flexible structure, so like they can find where they fit, and that will be the best way to promote community building in the classroom. Do you agree?
I do. I think you're on point, and it's making me think that in a future episode when we talk about navigating complex discussions in the classroom, like it's going to get messy. If someone follows this advice perfectly, it's not going to be a beautiful seamless situation every single day. rainbows and butterflies. Like there's going to be some hot moments, there's going to be some stickiness. And so I'm excited that we'll talk about that too.
Because, I mean, all of that is important, right? That's what a lot of the learning happens,
Yeah. Yeah.
which aligns with the title. All right, so thank you. As always, we will put some resources down below, so you can follow the link below and get some resources. And remember that teaching goes beyond what's on the syllabus. So thank you.